A king's hand rests on a sealed stone gate, the only thing holding back centuries of quiet. This is High King Borin Stonehand, standing before the legendary gates of Khazad-dûm. His choice to reclaim his people's ancient kingdom will either restore a golden age or see it fade forever. By the end of this journey, you will witness the renewal of an entire civilization from the edge of being forgotten. What ancient protectors still wait in the deep places, and what offering must be made for such a hope? Where are you listening from right now, and what is the hour where you are? What does it truly take to restore a world that had slipped into memory? The great hall fell silent as the ancient parchment scraped across the stone table. High King Borin Stonehand unrolled the map of the Silver Mountains, its faded inks tracing the lost pathways of their civilization. His finger landed on a name spoken only in whispers: Karak-Zorn, the heart of the old forges. This was his plan, not just to remember, but to rebuild. But the silence was quickly broken. Elder Grimnir rose, his voice a low rumble of dissent. He spoke of the great collapse, of the generations of peace bought with caution and withdrawal. To risk all now, he argued, was to dishonor the memory of those who came before. The council fractured along a fault line of fear and ambition. Borin saw the truth in their weary eyes, a deep-seated stagnation that had become a poison in the dark. It was a comfort that had cost them their spirit. The political strife was immediate, a crack in the kingdom's foundation. Borin knew that he could not wait for a consensus that would never come. He made his decision, a choice that would define his reign. He would proceed with only a small band of the most loyal dwarves, those who still held the old fire in their hearts. This division, this open conflict, weakened them at the very moment they needed unity most. The journey ahead demanded a single purpose, and now they were fractured. As the echoes of dissent faded in the vast hall, Borin's gaze turned from the arguing elders. He looked past them, through the high arches, toward the mist-shrouded mountain passes. The first true test of their resolve was already waiting there. The Stone-Fang Pass was a crumbling spine of granite and shadow. Every footfall sent pebbles skittering into echoing depths, and the wind howled a constant challenge. Borin led from the front, his broad shoulders set against the gale, with the young lore keeper Kayla close behind, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. The veteran warrior Deactivating brought up the rear, his gaze constantly scanning the unstable cliffs above them. They moved with deliberate care across a bridge of ancient, weathered stone, its surface slick with mist and time. Then came the low groan of shifting rock. A section of the cliff, face high above them, simply gave way. A cascade of stone and dust that was more a sigh of the mountain than a roar. The company scattered. When the dust settled, a young scout named Orin was caught beneath a heavy slab, his leg trapped and badly hurt. The immediate danger had passed, but a new, slower one had begun. Their pace, once steady, was now a painful crawl. Precious healing supplies were used to tend to Orin, and his comrades took turns carrying him, their progress measured in agonizing steps. Borin faced a choice, huddled with Deactivating and Kayla as the light began to fail. One path offered a safer, longer detour that would cost them days they did not have. The other was to press forward directly through the night, through the most treacherous part of the pass. His decision was swift. his voice leaving no room for debate. They would go on. This was not mere stubbornness. It was a calculated risk born of a difficult truth the accident had revealed. They were exposed, their strength finite. To delay was to risk being caught in the open, a target for whatever else the mountains held. The cost of their king's ambition was now measured in the pain of one of their own, and the shared worry that this was only the beginning. It was in the deepest hours of the night, their spirits at their lowest ebb, that Kayla's sharp eyes caught a glimmer in the torchlight. There, half covered in scree and moss, was a stone pillar. She brushed away the grime of ages to reveal a familiar rune, the angular symbol of their people from an age long past. It was an ancient waymarker, its face pointing like a stone finger deeper into the heart of the range. The sight was a spark in the overwhelming dark. This single, silent sentinel confirmed they were on the right path, a path their ancestors had walked. It offered no comfort for their hardship, but it gave them something far more vital, a thread of purpose to cling to, and that thread was leading them towards something the mountain had long concealed. The path the waymarker indicated led them not to a grand hall, but into the gaping mouth of a cavern, so vast their torchlight seemed to drown in it. This was the Whispering Caverns. The name became reality the moment they stepped inside, as 1,000 soft echoes gathered their every breath and footstep, twisting them into a chorus of indistinct murmurs that seemed to come from every direction at once. It was deeply disorienting, a constant presence that set everyone on edge. While Deactivating and the others worked to secure a rickety rope bridge spanning a seemingly bottomless crack in the floor, Kayla was drawn to the walls. She brushed away thick veils of ancient moss to reveal faded murals, their colors bleached by time, but their stories still hauntingly clear. They depicted the golden age of the Dwarven kingdom, with forges glowing like captured suns and great processions through jeweled halls. But the final panels told a different tale. They showed not a natural disaster, not a geological event, but a deliberate act. A dwarf of high stature, his features carved with severe precision, was depicted ordering the sabotage of the great central pillar, the very foundation of the main hall. The collapse was not an accident. It was a profound betrayal, a turning against the mountain from within. Kayla's voice trembled as she translated the runic captions for Borin. Our entire history, she whispered, the stories we tell our children about a tragic fate, they are built on a lie. The foundation of their cultural memory shifted in that moment, replaced by the stark truth of a forgotten conflict. Borin's face was granite, but his eyes burned. He trusted these chronicles, these images painted by the hands of those who witnessed the fall. Deactivating, however, was skeptical. He gestured at the disorienting whispers around them. This place plays tricks on the mind. How can we trust pictures on a wall when we cannot even trust our own ears? Kayla argued passionately, her finger tracing the specific, technical runes used by master artisans, a language impossible to fake. This is not a children's fable, Deactivating. This is a record. The tension between them was a new crack in their unity, a conflict between the warrior's caution and the scholar's revealed truth. Borin made his choice. He would trust the testimony of the stone. The final mural held a clue, a stylized map pointing toward a hidden vault, a place called the Stoneheart. It was a path of faith, a decision to follow a trail of ancient choices. Deactivating accepted the order, but his hand stayed on his axe haft. If this was a betrayal, then what else did those who came before leave behind? The murals suggested the architects of the collapse had things to protect, things worth such a profound act. That meant any place holding those things would not be left unguarded. The path forward, according to the map, was a narrow, winding tunnel that swallowed the torchlight whole. They were not just walking into the dark. They were walking into a challenge set centuries ago. The winding tunnel gave way to a vast, circular chamber, its air thick with the scent of ozone and old stone. Before them stood the deep gate, a seamless arch of black granite, and before that, its sentinel. It was not a creature of flesh and bone, but a construct of interlocking stone plates, twice the height of a dwarf, with a single, dull crystal pulsing in its chest. As their torchlight fell upon it, the crystal flared to life with a deep, resonant hum. The guardian was awake. It moved with a steady, inexorable grace, its stone fists hammering the ground where they had stood moments before. The chamber became a storm of shattering rock and urgent shouts. Deactivating met its charge head-on, his shield raised high. The impact was deafening. A spiderweb of cracks raced across the ancient metal, and with a final heavy crunch, the shield split in two, the force of the blow sending the veteran warrior stumbling back, his primary defense gone in a single, powerful exchange. They had to work as one, a single organism under siege. Borin drew the Guardian's attention, his own axe bouncing harmlessly off its stone hide, but creating the opening they needed. Deactivating, now shieldless, used his warhammer to strike at its legs, trying to unbalance the colossus. All the while, Kayla called out instructions from the chamber's edge, her voice cutting through the chaos. She had seen the patterns in the murals, the specific sequences of runes used for security. The key to stopping it was not force, but knowledge. A panel on the Guardian's back housed a circle of glowing runes, but to reach it, someone had to get dangerously close while the construct was active. Kayla made the choice without hesitation. As Borin and Deactivating launched a coordinated assault, drawing its fists away, she darted in behind it. Her fingers flew across the cold stone, pressing the ancient symbols in the precise order her research suggested. Each movement was a gamble. A wrong input could trigger a final, powerful defense. The Guardian shuddered, its limbs locking as she pressed the final rune. The light in its chest crystal flickered, dimmed, and then died, leaving the chamber in a sudden, profound silence, broken only by their ragged breaths. They had won, but the cost was immediate. Deactivating stared at the shards of his shield, a tangible loss that left him feeling exposed. Worse, the tremendous noise of the battle and the surge of energy from the deactivated Guardian had not gone unnoticed. From the deep passages behind them, a new sound echoed, a slow, grinding scrape of stone on stone, as if other, older things had been stirred from their long rest. The great stone gate slid aside with a low rumble, revealing not another cramped tunnel, but an impossible expanse. The first reclaimed level of the ancient kingdom stretched before them, a hall so vast its ceiling was lost in shadow. Pillars as wide as ancient trees marched into the darkness, and the still air held the faint, metallic scent of old forges. It was a sight of breathtaking promise, a kingdom waiting to be reborn. But in the echoing silence that followed the gates closing, a new question hung in the air. What else had been waiting here all this time for someone to finally make a sound? The Hall of Lost Echoes was a place of profound quiet. Borin's torchlight revealed a cavernous space where dust lay thick on still machinery and the frames of long dormant forges. In the center of the hall, a massive, fractured crystal conduit ran from the floor to the shadowed ceiling, its core dark and still. Borin ran a hand over the break, feeling a faint, residual warmth from deep within the stone. This was not just a light source, it was the hall's heart, and it was still beating, however softly. With tools pulled from his pack, he began the careful work, clearing debris and gently realigning the broken crystal segments. It was a task of pure faith, a hope that the mountain's ancient breath still flowed. As the final piece settled into place, a deep, resonant thrum pulsed through the floor. A soft, geothermal glow kindled within the crystal, spreading like liquid light through a network of veins in the walls and pillars. The hall awoke, not with a blinding flash, but with a gentle, rising illumination that chased the shadows from countless alcoves and revealed the true, majestic scale of the dwarven craft. As light filled the chamber, two things happened at once. New doorways, once perfectly hidden, were now outlined in soft energy, promising unseen chambers and forgotten workshops. But with the light came a low, persistent hum, and sections of the floor began to shimmer with a faint, cautionary orange glow. The protective wards had reactivated, an unseen labyrinth of energy that would deliver a powerful shock to any who misstepped. Their progress was now a careful dance, a test of memory and observation to navigate the safe path. While Borin and Deactivating studied the new pattern of challenges, Kayla was drawn to a small, collapsed desk, half hidden behind a pillar. Brushing away dust and splinters, she uncovered a metal box, its lock rusted shut. With patient effort, she opened it to find the fire-marked fragments of a journal, its pages brittle and written in a hurried, elegant hand. She pieced together the story of a master artisan, one of the few who knew the truth of the difficult times. His final entries spoke not of ruin, but of concealment. He wrote of a great power, a source of energy and creation so potent, the old leaders chose to secure it away, sealing it deep within the mountain to protect it from the very conflict that reshaped their kingdom. It was not a weapon, he insisted, but a seed for a new beginning. This changes everything, Kayla whispered, her voice full of awe. She held up the fragile pages. The leaders did not just leave this place. They left something behind, something meant for us to find, a power that could restore us in a single generation. Deactivating's face was serious, a power that someone else thought was too dangerous to use, he countered, his eyes on the shimmering wards. That sounds like a temptation, not a gift. Our people need hammers and anvils, not more legends. Borin listened to both, his gaze sweeping over the newly lit forges, their stones still cold, but now connected to the mountain's pulse. The debate was the old question anew, the dreamer against the pragmatist. His decision, when it came, was final. He placed a hand on the cool stone of a nearby forge. The journal speaks of a seed, he said, but a seed needs fertile ground to grow. Our people need warmth and light and steel. We will make this hall live again. We will restore the forges first. This power, if it is real, will wait. Our first duty is to the practical work of renewal. the importance of his choice became immediately clear. Every step toward the forge controls was a negotiation with the invisible wards. A misjudgment sent a ripple of energy across the room, closing another path. The very protections of their ancestors were now the greatest challenge to their return, a constant, quiet presence that made every action deliberate and slow. Finally, after painstaking effort, Borin reached the central control rune for the primary forge. He pressed his palm against it, channeling the geothermal energy through the conduit. With a deep, satisfying roar, the forge ignited, flames leaping to life with a clean, hot light that had not been seen in many years. It was a moment of profound triumph, the first true fire of the Reborn kingdom. But as the forge's heat washed over them, a new sound threaded its way through the roar, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come not from the hall around them, but from the profound depths far below. It was a call, steady and deep, pulling them toward the next layer of the mountain's mystery. The deep hum from below was a call they could not yet answer, for the work of rebirth demanded fire and steel first. The Forge of Embers, named for the faint, warm coals they found still smoldering in its great hearth, became their entire world. The air grew thick with the scent of old ash and effort as Borin and his small band of smiths hauled carts of rare coal and cleared ancient ventilation shafts choked with the debris of centuries. The labor was immense, a test of will against the stubborn weight of time. Deactivating, ever vigilant, stationed his most trusted guards at the single entrance, their eyes scanning the surrounding darkness for any sign of the presence they all felt watching. The final step was a ritual of pure belief. Borin, his hands blackened with soot, took the ceremonial torch and thrust it into the prepared fuel. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then a single ember caught, then another, and with a great whoosh of returning life, the sacred heart fire roared to life, its flames licking the soot-stained ceiling. The cheer that went up was raw and full of relief. From that fire came the first ingot of new Dwarven steel in countless years, its surface shimmering with a familiar, deep gray sheen. It was more than metal. It was a symbol, a tangible piece of their future pulled from the ashes of the past, and it sent a surge of morale through every dwarf present. But the mountain demanded a price for this victory. The forge's intense heat became a new enemy, sapping strength and baking the very air they breathed. Dwarves slumped against walls during brief rests, their faces streaked with sweat and exhaustion. The tension of the constant, grueling work reached a breaking point when a sharp crack echoed through the chamber. A massive, ancient support beam, stressed by the sudden return of intense heat and vibration, splintered near the ceiling. A shower of dust and stone fragments rained down, and the entire section of the forge groaned ominously, threatening to entomb their hard-won success beneath a cascade of rock. For a moment, fatigue held them all in place. Then Borin moved. His own body screamed in protest, but he shoved his own weariness aside, throwing his strength against the fractured timber, bracing it with his own back and shoulders. His voice, though strained, cut through the panic, calling for a replacement pillar. His act, leading from the front even in utter exhaustion, broke the spell of despair. The others found a second wind, rushing to secure the beam with fresh stone and metal supports. The forge was saved, and in that moment, They were not just a king and his subjects. They were a single unit, bound by shared struggle. This first true success was a beacon, proving their kingdom could be more than a memory. Yet, as the philosopher reminds us, light attracts more than just moths. The rhythmic, hopeful ringing of hammers shaping that first new steel was a declaration of presence, a sound the deep, quiet places had not known for a very long time. It was that very sound that was suddenly interrupted by a scout's urgent shout, his voice tight with alarm as he ran from the direction of the old mine entrance. The celebrations died in their throats. Their progress had been noticed. The scout's alarm sent them running toward the old mithril mines, the rhythmic ring of hammers replaced by the chilling scrape of countless claws on stone. The air in the narrow tunnel grew thick with a musky, animal scent, and strange, chittering echoes bounced off the walls ahead. Rounding a bend, their torchlight fell upon the source, a territorial pack of deep dwellers, their pale, sinewy bodies almost glowing in the dark. These were not mindless beasts, but clever creatures with tools of sharpened bone, defending a nest they had built directly inside a rich seam of mithril ore, the very resource they needed most. The standoff was immediate and tense, a wall of snarling faces and raised spears against dwarven steel. Deactivating did not hesitate. His axe was in his hand, his voice a low growl, advocating a swift, forceful clearance. They are in our way, he argued. Every moment we debate is a moment we are not forging. But Kayla saw more, her scholar's eye noting the careful structure of the nest, the way the creatures moved to protect their young. They are not invaders, she countered. They are residents. This is their home now. To drive them out with violence would stain a place we wish to make whole. The two perspectives created a stark divide, a choice between direct action and a more complicated path. Borin stood between them, his gaze moving from Deactivating's hardened face to Kayla's pleading one. His choice was a measured one, a new wisdom born from the mountain's harsh lessons. He would not sanction overwhelming force, but he could not allow their mission to fail. We will not destroy the nest, he declared. We will encourage them to find another. He ordered a team to carefully trigger a series of small, controlled collapses, using precise hammer strikes and strategic placements to seal the main entrance to the nest chamber with a rumble of falling stone. The message was clear. Their home was now closed, but their lives were spared. The creatures, confused and alarmed, retreated down a side tunnel, their chittering fading into the depths. The immediate threat was gone, but the cost was real. The primary mithril vein was now temporarily inaccessible, blocked by the very rockfall they had created. Their supply of fresh metal, so crucial for tools and construction, was now delayed, putting a new and urgent pressure on their dwindling reserves. It was a compromise that honored life, but tested their endurance. As the dust settled and the dwarves began the work of securing the new rockfall, Kayla's attention was caught by the tunnel wall near the old nest. There, growing in a soft, phosphorescent cluster, was a peculiar type of fungus she had never seen in any dwarven text. Its pale blue caps pulsed with a faint light, and its root-like filaments seemed to weave directly into the ore-rich rock. This was not a native species. Its presence here, in this specific place, raised a quiet, unsettling question. What else had found its way into the deep places during their long absence, and what did it feed upon? Kayla's discovery sent a ripple of quiet alarm through the camp. This was no ordinary fungus. Its pale, glowing caps and deep penetrating roots were a corrupting presence, a parasitic organism completely absent from every Dwarven botanical record she had ever studied. It did not just grow on the rock, it seemed to feed upon the very minerals within, leaving behind a brittle, crumbling stone that threatened the structural integrity of the tunnels themselves. Borin acted without hesitation, ordering a careful, controlled burn of the visibly affected areas. Teams moved in with torches, their flames searing the strange growths from the walls. But the blight proved unnervingly resilient. Where the fire touched, the visible fungus blackened and died, but within days, new, faintly glowing filaments would reappear just beyond the treated zone, spreading like a slow, silent tide through the stone. The true cost of this struggle became personal when a young scout, who had been part of the containment effort, stumbled back into camp unwell, his skin pale and damp with a cold sweat. A strange web-like pattern of faint blue lines had begun to spread from his hands up his arms. The camp's healer, her face grim, immediately isolated him in a sealed side chamber. His breathing grew labored, and a deep lethargy settled over him, a clear sign the blight was not just a threat to stone, but to living beings as well. The sight of one of their own falling ill cast a long shadow over their hard-won morale. Was this some natural consequence of the mountain's long dormancy, a random decay that had festered in the dark, or was it something more deliberate, a lingering presence left to guard these deep places against their return? The debate around Borin's makeshift command table was tense. Deactivating saw it as a simple, if dangerous, infestation, a problem for fire and axe, but Kayla argued for a deeper, more troubling origin. The way it targeted our food stores, she noted, her voice low and serious, and how it weakens those who touch it. This feels strategic. It acts less like a mindless growth and more like a defense mechanism. Borin listened to both views, his gaze shifting from the map of their reclaimed halls to the sealed chamber, holding their sick companion. The solution, he realized, would not be found through force alone. This was a riddle, a sickness that required a healer's knowledge and a scholar's insight. He turned to Kayla. "This is your task," he said, his trust in her clear and absolute. "Take a small, swift team. Follow this blight to its source. Do not engage whatever guards it. Only find its heart. Your knowledge is our best weapon here." Kayla accepted the charge, a heavy responsibility settling on her shoulders. She selected 2 other quick-witted dwarves skilled in navigation and herbalism, knowing that speed and subtlety would serve them better than brute strength in the tight, unknown passages ahead. The stakes of her mission escalated with every passing hour. The strange fungus was now appearing near their sealed grain silos, its tendrils threatening to spoil their vital food supplies. A general sense of weariness began to spread through the camp, a low-grade discomfort that sapped energy and sharpened tempers. The very health of their reborn kingdom was under a silent, creeping assault. Kayla and her team did not hesitate. They packed light, carrying only what was necessary for a swift journey, and with a final, determined look from Borin, they turned from the familiar halls and stepped into a narrow, downward-sloping tunnel. The air grew thick and unnaturally humid, carrying a sweet, cloying scent that was utterly foreign to the dry mountain deeps. The trail of faint blue glow led them on, deeper into the uncharted dark. The tunnel sloped down into a heavy, humid air, thick with a strange, sweet scent of age. Kayla and her team followed the trail of glowing fungus to its source, a vast, cavernous space that echoed with the slow, steady drip of water. This was the Sunken Reservoir, a foundational cistern meant to hold pure mountain water, but the pool before them was a murky, opaque green, its surface shimmering with an unnatural film. The blight was not growing on the walls here. It was blooming directly from the water itself, its pale blue tendrils spreading out from a single, troubling point. A massive ancient pipe, wide enough for a dwarf to walk through, ran along the cavern wall, and from a long, jagged crack in its side, a constant, sluggish flow of polluted water was leaking into the reservoir, affecting the entire system. This was no random failure. The fracture lines were too straight, too precise. The source of their sickness was a deliberate injury to the mountain's veins. They had to stop the flow, but their options were vanishingly few. They carried a small supply of a special, fast-setting sealant and heavy wax cloth for emergency repairs, but using it here, in the deep, still water, was a tremendous risk. The water's visibility was nearly zero, and the structural integrity of the entire pipe was now in question. One wrong move could trigger a full collapse, surrounding them in a surge of polluted water and stone. Kayla made the choice without hesitation. She would go down herself. She was the smallest and most nimble, and her understanding of the ancient construction was their only advantage. Wrapping the wax cloth around the sealant canister, she took a deep breath and slipped into the cold, murky water. The dive was a challenge of limited senses. The greenish water stung her eyes, and the only sound was the frantic beat of her own heart and the low groan of the strained pipe. She moved by touch alone, her hands finding the sharp edges of the crack. Working quickly against the burning in her lungs, she packed the sealant into the breach, molding the wax cloth over it like a bandage. The substance began to harden almost immediately, its chemical reaction warming the water around her hands. She pushed herself back to the surface, gasping for air as the flow from the crack slowed to a trickle, then stopped entirely. They had done it. They had stemmed the issue at its source. But the cost was sobering. They had used almost all of their waterproofing supplies on this single, determined repair. As she treaded water, catching her breath, her foot brushed against something solid lodged deep within the now exposed pipe mouth. Driven by a scholar's instinct that overrode her exhaustion, she dove one last time, her fingers closing around a hard, angular object wedged into the interior of the pipe. She pulled it free and surfaced, holding a small, intricately carved stone. It was not Dwarven make. The symbols were fluid, organic, utterly alien to the geometric precision of her own people's runes. It was an artifact, placed with purpose. The pollution was not an accident of time. It was an act of intelligent interference. Returning to Borin, she presented the stone, her clothes still damp from the reservoir. "We stopped the flow," she said, her voice tired but firm, but the blight was not natural. It was an intentional act. She placed the strange carved stone on the table before him. This was inside the pipe. Its markings suggest a culture, one that lives deep beneath the stone, one we have never known was there. The implications settled over the command chamber like a heavy frost. Their struggles were not against a forgotten past or simple creatures, but against a conscious, present presence. The carvings on the stone were a message, a signal, and perhaps a key to understanding the true nature of the challenge they now faced. The carved stone sat on the archive table, its alien script a silent challenge. Borin and Kayla worked by the soft glow of a newly restored light crystal, their fingers tracing the unfamiliar, flowing lines. They pulled ancient codices and crumbling scrolls from the shelves of the reclaimed library chamber, a room that still smelled of old leather and dust. For hours, they searched, cross-referencing the symbols with every known language of the deep places. It was Kayla who found the match, her voice a hushed whisper of disbelief. The carvings were not dwarven, nor were they of any hostile creature. They belonged to the Sverfniblin, the deep gnomes, a people recorded in their oldest histories as reclusive allies, thought to have vanished from the world long ago. The realization landed with the weight of a falling mountain. If the gnomes still lived, then the source of the blight was not a mindless infestation. It was either a terrible accident stemming from their own forgotten engineering, or worse, a deliberate act of sabotage. The council chamber, once united in the face of natural hardship, fractured along a new line of fear. Duvalin's argument was swift and practical. If they are still here, and they are poisoning our water and our stone, then they have already declared their intent, he stated, his hand resting on his axe. We answer in kind. This is a threat to be removed, but Kayla saw a different history in the old texts. The records speak of pacts, of shared knowledge. What if their actions are born of fear? She countered. What if our return, our noise and our fires, feels like an invasion to them? To attack without understanding could ignite a war in the dark, a conflict that would bleed their strength for generations. Borin listened to the debate, his gaze fixed on the carved stone. It was not a weapon, but a crafted object, a thing of culture. To treat its makers as mere enemies felt like a failure of wisdom. His decision, when it came, carried the quiet gravity of a king. We will extend a hand before we raise a fist, he declared. We will attempt diplomacy. He ordered a small, unarmed delegation to be prepared, carrying only tokens of peace and copies of the ancient treaties. It was a tremendous risk. A failed overture would not only cost lives, it would prove to the gnomes that the dwarves were exactly the aggressors they might fear, provoking a hidden war in the profound depths that could strangle their newborn kingdom before it ever truly drew breath. The descent into the lower caves was like stepping into another world. The familiar gray granite gave way to walls of glittering crystal, which refracted their single torchlight into 1,000 scattered stars. The air was still and cool, humming with a faint, almost musical vibration. Every footstep echoed with unnatural clarity in the crystalline passages, announcing their presence long before they could see what lay ahead. They were walking into a realm of silence and light, utterly uncertain if they would be met as long-lost kin or as intruders to be erased. The crystalline tunnels refracted their torchlight into 1,000 scattered stars, a disorienting beauty that made every path look the same. The delegation moved with deliberate care, their senses overwhelmed by the prismatic glow and the low hum that vibrated through the very air. After what felt like an age of wandering through the silent, glittering maze, the passage abruptly opened into a vast, domed cavern. Here, the deep gnomes awaited them, dozens of small, slender figures with large, luminous eyes watched from balconies carved into the crystal walls, their expressions a mixture of deep caution and profound curiosity. They were not brandishing weapons, but they made no welcoming gesture either. The air was thick with the unspoken weight of centuries spent in isolation. Communication was an immediate wall. The dwarves spoke the old formal greetings, but the gnomes only tilted their heads, their own language a series of soft, melodic clicks and hums that held no meaning for their visitors. The chasm of time and silence between their peoples felt vast and unbridgeable. It was Kayla who stepped forward, moving slowly to show she held no weapon. She opened her palm, revealing the intricately carved stone she had pulled from the polluted pipe. She placed it gently on the smooth floor between the two groups and stepped back. The effect was immediate. An elder gnome, his skin like worn leather and his eyes holding the light of countless years, moved forward. He picked up the stone, his long fingers tracing the familiar carvings with a look of stunned recognition. He looked from the stone to Kayla, and for the first time, the deep wariness in his gaze softened into something akin to wonder. The token of their shared, ancient past had become a key, unlocking a door both sides thought had been sealed forever. Through a combination of gestures, carefully spoken words, and the gnome's own remarkable ability to glean meaning from tone and intent, a story began to emerge. The elder, whose name they understood as Lorik, explained that they too were experiencing hardship. He called the Blight the stone sleep, a creeping malaise that drained the vitality from the rock and induced a deep lethargy in his own people. They had believed the dwarves' return, with their loud forges and their reshaping of the mountain's deep flows, had awakened this ancient sickness. Their act of affecting the reservoir was not one of malice, but of desperate self-preservation, a misguided attempt to drive away what they saw as the source of the corruption. The truth was far more troubling. The stone sleep was not their fault, nor was it the gnomes. It was a symptom of a deeper, older corruption festering in the earth's heart, a problem that threatened both of their civilizations with a slow, quiet fading. Lorik looked at Borin, his large eyes filled with a shared resolve. He would guide them. He knew the path to the source of the sickness, a journey into the deepest, most unstable layers of the world, where the very stone dreamed a fever dream of decay. The path Lorik led them down felt less like a tunnel and more like a descent into a place out of balance with the world. The air grew thick and heavy, humming with a discordant energy that set their teeth on edge. The familiar, comforting scent of stone and mineral was gone, replaced by a sharp, acrid odor of ozone and forgotten places. The crystalline walls around them were no longer glittering with pure light, but were veined with ugly, pulsing black filaments that seemed to throb with a sickly rhythm. This was the source of the stone sleep, the troubled heart of the mountain's distress. The chamber they finally entered was a vast, hollow geode, a space of breathtaking scale and deep significance. At its center, where a being of pure, vibrant earth energy should have pulsed with life, was the elemental spirit. It was a towering form of shifting crystal and molten light, but its form was fractured, its light dim and flickering erratically. The black tendrils of the Blight were wrapped around it like chains, pulsing as they drew its vitality away. With every shudder that moved through its form, a fresh wave of imbalance pulsed outward through the stone, a visible disruption seeping into the mountain's very core. The spirit was in deep distress, and its struggle was affecting the land around it. The moment they were perceived, the chamber erupted in motion. The spirit, blinded by its own turmoil, lashed out. Shards of darkened crystal shot from the walls like black lightning, forcing the dwarves and gnomes to dive for cover. The floor itself bucked and heaved in violent tremors, threatening to throw them into deep fissures that cracked open at their feet. Deactivating and the other warriors immediately raised their weapons, their instincts screaming to defend themselves, to calm this tormented being before it could bring the entire cavern down upon their heads. It was a clear and present challenge, a force of raw, unstable power, but Borin saw past the reaction to the source. He saw the chains of Blight, the spirits trapped in desperate state. To fight it would be to fight the mountain itself, and in its wounded condition, such a conflict would surely end in a catastrophic collapse that would seal both their kingdoms for a very long time. His voice cut through the chaos, a command that went against every warrior's impulse. "We do not fight it," he roared over the shattering stone. "We heal it." The plan was a thread of hope against a tide of instability. Kayla and Lorik, working frantically together, deciphered the nature of the corruption. It was not a physical ailment, but a spiritual one, a dissonance that had twisted the spirit's connection to its own home. To heal it, they would need to perform a ritual of purification, using their combined strengths to create a harmonic resonance strong enough to shatter the black chains. The dwarves would use their deep connection to the mountain stone, channeling their will into a steady, grounding rhythm. The gnomes, masters of crystal and vibration, would weave a counter melody of pure, cleansing light. It required absolute precision and a unity they had only just begun to forge. The stakes could not be higher. A single misstep in the ritual, a moment of failed coordination, would not just mean their own end. It would amplify the spirit's distress, overloading its fractured form and triggering a chain reaction that would shake the geode chamber and collapse the entire mountain from the inside out. As they took their positions, the elementals' cries grew into a deafening sound of despair, and the foundations of the world shook with a final, terrible urgency. The chamber echoed with a profound sense of struggle, a sound of shifting stone and shimmering light. Borin raised the focus crystal, a flawless gem passed down through his royal line, and its core began to pulse with a soft, steady radiance. Around him, the deep gnomes began their song, a complex harmony of hums and clicks that wove through the chaos, creating pockets of stability in the turbulent air. The ritual had begun, a determined symphony of will against the discordant energy unsettling the mountain. Borin poured his own life force, the unbroken lineage of his kingship, into the crystal, and a beam of pure, white light reached out, touching the tormented elemental at its core. The effect was immediate but fragile. The spirit's frantic movements slowed, and the pulsing dark tendrils of the Blight drew back from the cleansing light. The land itself seemed to ease as the creeping sickness began to recede from the crystalline walls, the discolored veins fading back into the pure, glittering stone. But the effort of maintaining the connection was immense. Borin's body trembled with the strain, his vision blurring at the edges, while the gnomes' harmonious song became a physical weight, their voices raw with the effort of holding the melody against the overwhelming noise. It was a battle of pure concentration, and they were all tiring. Then came the sharp crack from above. A section of the cavern's ceiling, weakened by the elemental's violent tremors, gave way. A cascade of rock and dust tumbled down directly toward the circle of ritualists. For a heart-stopping second, the song faltered, and Borin's beam of light flickered. The spirit shuddered, the dark tendrils surging back with renewed force. In that moment of crisis, two figures moved as one. Deactivating, the dwarf, and a gnome guard with eyes like chips of flint, did not hesitate. Without a word, they threw themselves toward the collapsing section, bracing their bodies against a falling slab of stone. Deactivating's powerful shoulders took the main weight, his boots grinding into the floor, while the gnome swiftly directed others to pile supporting rocks. It was not a planned maneuver, but an instinctual act of shared purpose. Their quick, unified action shored up the breach, protecting the circle and allowing the ritual to continue unbroken. The alliance was sealed not in words, but in the shared strain of holding up the fragile world around them. With their concentration secured, the cleansing light blazed brighter than ever. A final resonant tone echoed through the geode, and the last of the dark filaments dissolved into dust. The elemental spirit, now free, settled into a calm, radiant form, its light warm and steady. The oppressive hum in the air softened into a gentle, healing vibration. They had succeeded, but the cost of their victory was written in their exhausted faces and trembling limbs. The ritual had drained them completely, leaving them spent in the profound silence that followed. Yet from that silence came a new sound, the gentle, unmistakable trickle of clean water. A spring, once choked with corruption, now bubbled up from a fissure in the floor, its pure flow washing over the stone. As the water ran, it traced new paths along the cavern walls, seeping into seams that had been dry for centuries. With a low rumble, a section of what they had thought was solid rock slid aside, revealing a passage that had been concealed by mineral deposits and the Blight's influence. The mountain, healed, was now offering up its long-held secrets. The newly revealed waterway led them into a chamber that stole the very breath from their lungs. This was no simple storeroom. It was the hidden treasury, a vault of such scale that their torchlight could not find its furthest walls. Gold and jewels lay in great rivers, yes, but Borin's eyes passed over the glittering hoard and fixed on what truly mattered. Along the walls, protected in sealed crystal tubes, were the kingdom's historical records and, most precious of all, the master schematics for its greatest works. Kayla unrolled one of the large, resilient sheets, her hands trembling as she revealed the intricate plans for the Grand Hall of Thrones, a structure they had only known from fragmented songs. Another scroll detailed the original, complex irrigation and geothermal venting systems, the very blueprints they desperately needed to restore the mountain's breath and pulse. A low murmur of awe quickly turned into a heated debate. Some of the dwarves, their eyes wide with the gleam of centuries of accumulated wealth, argued for immediate distribution. "We have earned this," they said. "Let us take what is rightfully ours and forge our own legacies." The temptation was a powerful force, a siren call of personal comfort after so much hardship. But Borin stood before the mounds of gold, his voice cutting through the avarice with the clear, hard ring of principle. "This is not a prize to be divided," he declared, his gaze sweeping over every face. "This is the seed corn for our entire civilization. Every coin, every gem, will be measured against the cost of a new aqueduct, a new forge, a new home. Our kingdom's renewal is the only legacy that matters." His decision was absolute, He declared the entire treasury a communal resource, the foundation upon which their united future would be built. This act solidified his vision, forging a deeper bond of purpose among the majority who saw their future in the rising halls, not in their own pockets. But it also created a quiet, simmering resentment in a small few. They had endured the same dangers, they reasoned, and were now being denied their rightful reward. This fracture, though small, was a new kind of threat, a poison of discontent that could seep into the foundations of their new society. As the group carefully cataloged the priceless schematics, Kayla's sharp eyes caught a curious notation on the very edge of the master architectural plan. It was a single, elegant rune, one she had only ever seen in myth. She traced it with her finger, her voice barely a whisper. "This symbol," she said, "it refers to the Sky Spire." I always believed it was just a story. The Sky Spire blueprint unfurled across the stone table, a vision so grand it felt more like prophecy than architecture. Kayla and the deep gnome artisans gathered around it, their voices hushed. The design showed a colossal tower, a needle of stone and crystal meant to rise from the highest peak, its pinnacle calibrated to capture and focus the light of the stars themselves. This harnessed energy would flow down into the mountain, supercharging the forges with a clean, limitless power and spreading a gentle, healing resonance across the land. The potential was staggering, a promise to not just rebuild their kingdom, but to elevate it beyond its former glory. Yet the sheer scale of the endeavor was a sobering reality. It would require entire forests of timber for scaffolding, new quarries opened for specific, rare stones, and a level of coordination between dwarves and gnomes that had never been attempted. The ambition of the project immediately created a rift in their fragile community. How could they justify pouring their finite strength, their hard-won resources, into a single, monumental dream when their people still needed fortified gates and proper roofs over their heads? The debate that followed was the most difficult of Borin's reign. The voices of caution, led by many of the veteran warriors, were loud and practical. "We are still vulnerable," they argued. "Our walls are not yet high, and our stores are not yet full. To begin this now is to build a palace on a foundation of sand. It is a risk that could break us." Borin listened to every concern, his gaze lingering on the blueprint, on the elegant lines that reached for the heavens. He saw the fear in their eyes, the fear of overreaching, of losing all they had fought for. But he also saw the spark in Kayla's eyes, and the quiet conviction of the gnome artisans who believed such a thing was possible. His decision, when it came, was not made lightly. "We have survived by looking to our immediate needs," he declared to the assembled council. "But to truly live, we must sometimes look to the stars. The Sky Spire will be our declaration, not just to ourselves, but to the world, that we are here to create, not just to endure. It is a symbol of our rebirth, and I will see it begun." Committing to the spire was a gamble that raised the stakes of their entire endeavor. It would stretch their resources thinner than ever before, demanding sacrifices from every dwarf and gnome. And such a visible, grand work could not be hidden. Its construction would be a beacon, announcing their presence to any who watched the mountain peaks, potentially drawing the gaze of unknown powers from the surface world. To find a foundation capable of supporting such a wonder, Borin ordered his most sure-footed scouts to ascend the highest, most treacherous peaks, to seek a place where the stone touched the sky. The Peak of Eagles was a blade of stone scraping the sky. Deactivating led the survey team up its treacherous face, their hands and feet finding purchase on windswept ledges no wider than a dwarf's boot. The gale was a constant, roaring force, threatening to pluck them from the rock and send them spinning into the abyss. Every step was a battle of will against the mountain's breath, a test of their right to even be there. After a grueling climb, they finally hauled themselves onto a broad, miraculously stable plateau, a perfect foundation for the sky spire. But their triumph was cut short by a piercing shriek that tore through the wind. The plateau was not empty. It was a nesting ground, and they were the intruders. Massive, golden-eyed eagles watched them from rocky perches, their powerful talons gripping the stone, their hostility a palpable force in the thin air. One of the younger scouts instinctively reached for his crossbow, his nerves frayed by the climb and the sudden confrontation. Deactivating's command was immediate and sharp, his voice carrying over the gale. "Stand down," he ordered, every weapon lowered, and for the team to retreat slowly to the far edge of the plateau, making themselves small and non-threatening. It was a direct challenge to their pride to stand unarmed before such powerful, territorial creatures. The consequences of a misstep were immense. A single act of aggression could turn the eagles into permanent, aerial adversaries, capable of disrupting their supply lines and isolating their kingdom from the high passes. It would be a conflict they could not win, alienating not just the eagles, but any other mountain dwellers who saw them as reckless. For 3 long days and bitter cold nights, Deactivating and his team waited. They did not advance, they did not build fires, they did nothing to claim the space. They simply existed within it, a quiet, patient presence. They ate cold rations and huddled against the rock, their respect for the eagle's domain their only shield. On the 4th morning, as the sun broke over the neighboring peaks, the great eagle matriarch descended. Her wingspan cast a moving shadow over them all, and she landed a short distance away, her intelligent eyes studying the dwarves who had shown such uncommon restraint. The parley had begun. The eagle matriarch's gaze held a profound weight, ancient and untamed. Deactivating stood firm, his hands open and empty at his sides, the wind whipping at his beard. He did not speak of conquest or ownership. Instead, he spoke of the mountain as a shared home, of a coming shadow that threatened the high places and the deep. He offered a pact, a promise of mutual guardianship. The dwarves would have their foundation, and in return, the eagles would gain vigilant allies, their eyes and axes turned against any who would threaten the sacred peaks. He made one final, crucial pledge, gesturing to the Sky Spire plans. Its pinnacle would not be for dwarves alone, he vowed. It would include a great roost, a citadel in the clouds where the eagles could nest forever, honored and integrated into the very symbol of the Reborn kingdom. The negotiation hung on a razor's edge, a balance between the eagles' fierce pride and their pragmatic understanding of a changing world. An insult, a single hint of deceit, would have sent them back to the depths, their grandest dream shattered by a failure of respect. But Deactivating's words were as solid as the stone beneath their feet. The matriarch gave a slow, deliberate nod, a regal dip of her head that sealed their fate. The alliance was forged not in a hall of kings, but on a windswept ledge at the top of the world, This new bond immediately transformed their strategic position. The skies, once a terrifying expanse of unknown threats, were now patrolled by the keenest eyes in the mountain range. The eagles became their scouts, their swift messengers, a living network that connected their efforts across vast distances. Yet this boon came with a profound responsibility. They were now bound to protect the eagles' domains and their fledglings, tying their own security to the well-being of another ancient race. Any conflict with the eagles' concerns would now be their concern. With the site secured by promise rather than force, the true, backbreaking work commenced. A steady stream of dwarves and gnomes began the arduous ascent, a human chain scaling the peak. They hauled notched logs for scaffolding, ropes thicker than a dwarf's arm, and the first, carefully selected foundation stones. Each lift was a calculated risk, a battle against gravity and gale, turning the Peak of Eagles into a theater of shared effort and monumental ambition. The ascent was a demanding, vertical challenge against gravity itself. A complex network of rope, timber, and effort wove its way up the Peak of Eagles, a living artery carrying stone and metal to the summit. Dwarves and gnomes worked in synchronized teams, their voices rising in rhythmic chants to guide the massive pulley systems lifting each foundational block. Below, others toiled on a series of switchback ramps, their muscles straining to move heavily laden carts, inch by careful inch. This was engineering on a grand scale, a testament to their combined ingenuity, but the physical toll was immediate and constant. The thin, sharp air at that height was a steady challenge, leaving many short of breath and lightheaded with a deep fatigue that rest could not easily mend. Minor injuries became common, requiring a steady rotation of workers back down to the restorative warmth of the lower forges. Morale was a delicate thing, tested daily by the mountain's sheer scale. Borin made his choice without ceremony. He set aside his royal vestments and took his place on the ropes, his broad shoulders pulling with the same determined effort as the newest laborer. His hands grew tough and his back felt the strain, but his presence was a quiet, powerful statement. He was not a king who commanded from a distant hall. He was a leader who shared the weight of the stone in every sense. Seeing their ruler marked by the same effort and breathing the same thin air kindled a stubborn fire in the hearts of his people. They would not be deterred because he would not yield first. The importance of this shared endeavor was absolute. A single failed cable, a misstep on the ramp, could send weeks of vital work tumbling down the mountainside. Such an event would do more than pause construction. It would fracture the fragile momentum that held their entire society together, turning their grandest hope into a marker of disappointment. As the final, immense foundation stones were locked into place, a new and more subtle challenge emerged from the heavens themselves. The architects and stargazers gathered on the plateau, their instruments aimed at the constellations above. The entire purpose of the Sky Spire was to channel celestial energy, but to do that, its core axis had to be aligned with a perfect, unwavering precision to the northern star. The slightest miscalculation in its angle, an error of even a single degree, would render the entire structure inert, a beautiful but useless needle of stone. The calculations were dizzyingly complex, a language of mathematics and cosmic patterns that had to account for the very curve of the world. The engineers who had mastered the mountain now faced a puzzle written in the stars, and the silence on the peak was filled not with the sound of labor, but with the quiet, intense focus of a problem that could not be solved by strength alone. The silence on the peak was broken only by the turning of crystal lenses and the soft scratch of charcoal on slate. Kayla and the deep gnome astrologers worked through the deep mountain nights, their eyes fixed on the star charts and the complex brass instruments they had calibrated for this single purpose. The calculations were a delicate web of numbers and angles, a puzzle that had to be solved with absolute precision. It was during the third consecutive night of this intense work that Kayla noticed a subtle but devastating inconsistency. The original blueprint's angle for the central conduit was off by a fraction of a degree, an error so small it would have been invisible to any but the most trained eye, yet enough to ensure the spire would never channel a single spark of stellar energy. The ancient architects had made a mistake, and generations of dwarves had accepted their work as perfect. The news sent a ripple through the command tent. To correct the flaw meant disassembling a significant portion of the foundational ring they had just finished locking into place, a process that would cost them weeks of dedicated labor. The sighs of frustration from the master builders were almost a physical force. "We have already poured our strength into this stone," they argued. "To take it down now feels like a disregard for our own effort." The tension was a heavy presence, the dream of the spire suddenly feeling more like a weight. Kayla stood her ground, her voice steady despite her weariness. She did not argue with passion, but with simple, clear fact. "If we build upon this error," she stated, "we build a monument to our own pride, not a functioning spire. It will be the greatest folly in our history, a beautiful lie pointing at the sky." Her decision to prioritize the truth of the design over the appearance of progress was a test of her authority and their collective will. Borin, his own face lined with the strain of leadership, listened and then gave his quiet approval. The work would be undone. The following days were among the most difficult of the entire endeavor. Dwarves who had labored with pride to raise the stones now worked with quiet frustration to take them down. The sound of hammers was no longer one of construction, but of careful deconstruction. The delay was a fertile ground for doubt. Whispers began to circulate among the weary workers. Had the king overreached? Was this grand project a challenge, drawing their strength into a vast undertaking? Their already stretched supplies of food and tool steel began to dwindle at an alarming rate, and the mountain wind seemed to blow colder, carrying the chill of uncertainty. Just as morale threatened to falter entirely, a long, low call echoed from the highest watch post, a sound that had not been heard in many months. A scout pointed a hopeful finger toward the lower passes. Winding its way up the switchback trail was a caravan, a long line of wagons and marching dwarves, their banners bearing the familiar symbols of the main hold. They had not been forgotten. The lead cart was driven by none other than Elder Grimnir, his face no longer set in disagreement, but in resolve. He had rallied the home kingdom, convincing them that their future lay not in safe isolation, but in the bold dream taking shape on the peak. The wagons were filled with fresh iron, sacks of grain, and a company of rested, eager volunteers. Their arrival was a tide of renewed hope, washing away the whispers of dissent and filling the mountain air with the sounds of reunion and reinforced purpose. The arrival of the caravan was a river of life flowing into the stone, The weary workers on the peak watched as fresh crafts dwarves, their tools gleaming and their faces bright with purpose, joined the lines. Sacks of grain and barrels of ale were unloaded, and the rhythmic ring of new hammers on fresh steel filled the air with a renewed, confident music. This was more than just supplies. It was a tangible message from the main hold, a declaration that they had not been forgotten. The sight of Elder Grimnir's personal banner at the head of the column was a profound reassurance, a sign that his formidable influence was now, at last, turning in their favor. For a few golden days, the entire mountainside buzzed with a contagious energy, the project leaping forward with a speed that had once seemed impossible. But the caravan master, a grizzled dwarf with a face lined by long journeys, brought more than just provisions. He sought a private audience with Borin, his voice low and serious. He reported that while Grimnir had secured this shipment, a powerful faction on the council was actively gathering opposition. They called the Sky Spire a king's folly, a glittering vanity that was draining the kingdom's resources for a dream, while practical needs went unmet. The political struggle, once a distant echo, was now a clear and present challenge, threatening to sever the lifeline of support just as their dream was taking physical form. Borin listened, his expression thoughtful. He did not rage or despair. Instead, he withdrew to his tent and spent the deep hours of the night writing. He did not compose a royal decree, but a heartfelt letter, his words etched with the sincerity of one who has carried both the hope and the stone. He spoke of the shared spirit he witnessed every day on the peak, of the alliance with the gnomes and the eagles, and of a future built not on fear, but on a legacy of creation. He ended with an open invitation, a plea for every dwarf, regardless of their stance, to come and see the work for themselves, to feel the new pulse of the mountain and add their own strength to it. He entrusted the letter to the caravan master, a single parchment carrying the weight of his entire vision. The stakes were now higher than ever. The project's continuation depended not just on their labor, but on the hearts and minds of dwarves hundreds of miles away. A single negative vote in the main hold could halt future caravans, leaving the spire without the resources it needed to cross the finish line. Yet, emboldened by the reinforcements and Borin's unwavering resolve, the work surged ahead. The structure began to rise from its foundation with breathtaking speed, its elegant form a silent argument against its critics, a promise of what could be etched in stone against the open sky. The final and most delicate piece of the spire waited in the workshop, a great crystal of flawless quartz meant to become its focusing eye. For weeks, the master crafters had worked with a jeweler's patience, grinding and polishing the stone to the precise shape described in the corrected plans. The moment of testing came under a clear night sky. The massive lens was carefully placed in its frame, its surface a perfect, cold mirror of the stars above. As the first concentrated beam of starlight was meant to awaken the central conduit, a sharp and sickening crack echoed through the silent chamber. A hidden, microscopic flaw in the stone, invisible until stressed by the focused energy, had spread across the entire surface, leaving the lens useless. The quiet that followed felt heavier than any stone. Weeks of dedicated work lay in glittering fragments. The setback was more than a material loss. It felt like a deep wound to their shared spirit. Whispers returned, louder now, suggesting the mountain itself resisted their ambition. The master crafters were deeply discouraged, their confidence broken along with their creation. It was in this atmosphere of growing doubt that the deep gnome elder, Lorik, approached Borin with a quiet and radical idea. He spoke of a unique crystal formation, a kind of living stone found only in the deepest and most shifting chambers of their oldest minds. This crystal was said to resonate with celestial energies in a way no other stone could, but it was known to be difficult to gather and shape. Its inner structure, a mystery that had puzzled even the most skilled gnome artisans. To use it meant trading a known, failed method for a complete unknown. Borin stood before the fractured lens, the weight of the entire project pressing down on him. He could ask the crafters to begin again, to seek another flawless quartz and risk another hidden weakness, or he could place his faith in the alliance he had worked so hard to build, trusting the gnome's deep knowledge of the earth's most hidden gifts. His decision became a testament to that hard-won trust. "We will try the gnome crystal," he declared, his voice firm. "Our strength lies not in repeating the past, but in building a new future together." The importance of his choice could not be greater. If this rare crystal also failed, they would have no clear way forward. Their resources were stretched thin, their spirits too fragile to attempt a third lens. The entire vision of the Sky Spire, the symbol of their reborn kingdom, would fade into memory, a reminder of a dream that reached very far. A joint expedition was formed at once, a small group of the most resilient dwarves and gnomes, their faces set with quiet resolve. They turned from the ascending spire and began the long descent, not into the familiar dark of their own halls, but into the most shifting and unpredictable depths of the gnome mines, a place where the earth itself was known to dream in uncertain ways. The gnome mines were a world of shifting whispers and unstable ground. The air hung thick with the scent of crushed stone and ancient, trapped gases, a constant reminder that the earth here was never fully at rest. The joint expedition moved with painstaking caution, testing every footstep before committing their full weight. Dvalin's warriors took the lead, using their knowledge of structural stress to identify the most dangerous fissures, while the gnomes, with their innate sensitivity to vibration, pointed out pockets of invisible, volatile gas that could be stirred by a single misplaced strike. Reaching the crystal vein was only half the challenge. Extracting it was a delicate art. The living stone could not be simply shattered. It had to be persuaded from its resting place. Dwarven picks and gnome sonic tools worked in a careful duet, chipping and resonating until a massive, flawless segment of the crystal came free, its interior shimmering with a captured, nebular light. Their moment of triumph, however, was instantly silenced by a deep, groaning roar from the tunnel behind them. The route they had taken was now sealed under a mountain of fallen rock, the way home blocked by the very instability they had worked so hard to navigate. The air in the confined space grew heavy and stale almost at once. A tangible unease began to spread, a silent pressure that felt as threatening as the rock itself. Fear was a luxury they could not afford, a fire that would consume their limited oxygen faster than any physical effort. Dvalin's voice cut through the rising tension, low and steady, a rock in the swirling current of dread. He did not shout orders, he assigned roles. He organized a shift-digging effort, pairing the strongest dwarves with the most precise gnomes, ensuring that every individual had a part to play and that no one would exhaust themselves in a frantic solo attempt. Some cleared debris, others shored up the new tunnel they were creating, and the rest conserved their strength in a disciplined rotation. It was a masterful display of leadership under pressure, transforming a trapped group into a single, determined machine. The stakes of their labor were measured not in inches of cleared stone, but in the relentless passage of time. Every hour spent in that dark pocket was an hour lost from the celestial alignment window, a finite opportunity that would not return for another year. The knowledge that their entire purpose could be thwarted by a simple delay, that the spire might stand incomplete and silent because they were a single day too late, fueled their tired muscles with a desperate urgency. After a tense and grueling day of relentless effort, a final coordinated push dislodged a keystone, and a rush of cool, fresh air flooded their chamber. They did not pause to celebrate. Scooping up their precious crystal prize, they turned and ran, their race against the calendar now a frantic sprint back toward the sky. The final ascent was a battle against the sky itself. A dedicated team of climbers, roped together for safety, began the painstaking journey up the spire's sheer face, the precious crystal secured in a sling between them. The wind was a living force at that height, a constant howling pressure that threatened to tear them from the stone. Every inch gained was a victory of will over the gale's relentless push, their progress a slow, deliberate dance on a vertical stage. Just as they neared the most exposed section, a sudden, violent gust slammed into them, sending the crystal swinging wildly. For one heart-stopping moment, the entire assembly tilted, the ropes groaning under the strain as the priceless lens threatened to smash against the unyielding tower. It was the eagles who answered the unspoken call. The matriarch and her strongest fledglings descended from the sun, their powerful talons gently but firmly gripping the support harness. Lifting the crystal's weight, they carried it the final, impossible distance, soaring past the treacherous winds to the very summit. Their alliance, forged in respect, had become their salvation. On the small, windswept platform at the pinnacle, Borin waited. He dismissed the others, ordering them to the safety of the lower scaffolds. This final act was his to complete alone. With the crystal now hovering just above its housing, guided by the eagle's precise release, he reached out. His hands, though marked and calloused for months of labor, were perfectly steady. There was no room for error, no second chance. He guided the great crystal down, its base settling into the waiting receptacle with a deep, resonant click that was felt more than heard. A perfect seal. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the fading cry of the eagles as they circled away, as the sun dipped below the distant peaks, casting the world in long shadows. Every dwarf and gnome on the mountainside fell quiet. All eyes turned upward, fixed on the darkening expanse where the first stars would soon emerge. The spire stood complete, a silent prayer etched in stone against the coming night. The moment of truth was here, and the fate of their dream now rested on the cold, distant light of the heavens. The great crystal drank the starlight in silence. For one terrible, endless heartbeat, nothing happened. The peak of eagles held its breath, and the hopes of an entire kingdom hung suspended in the cold air. Then a soft hum began to vibrate through the stone, a deep resonance that was felt in the bones before it was heard by the ears. A beam of pure, condensed light, white and gentle as moonfall, lanced down from the pinnacle, piercing the heart of the mountain. It struck the central forge in the great hall below, and with a sound like a single, clear chime, the sacred fire roared to life, burning not with the orange of common flame, but with a brilliant, unwavering silver. This new light pulsed through the reactivated crystal conduits, spreading a visible, warming glow that cascaded through the reclaimed halls and out across the mountain slopes. Where the light touched the barren stone outside, thin, hardy grasses and luminous mosses began to sprout almost at once, their green a stark contrast to the gray rock, a sign of the land healing at an impossible speed. The forges responded with a new song, their fires burning with a heat so pure and clean, it left no smoke, only a shimmer in the air above the anvils. Borin did not cheer. He simply stood, his hand resting on the cold stone of the spire's base, and watched the light flow. The weight of a king's lonely faith lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the quiet, solid certainty of a promise kept. His gamble, his vision, had been proven right. The unified cheer that erupted from dwarves and gnomes alike was a force of nature, a roar of triumph that echoed the mountain's new hum. But their celebration was cut short. A lookout's horn blared from the high watch, its urgent note slicing through the joy. All eyes turned to the main pass, where a large, official delegation was now clearly visible, their banners snapping in the wind. They had not come with the slow progress of a supply caravan. They moved with the deliberate purpose of a council on the march, and their arrival at this precise moment of ultimate success could mean only one thing. The final word from the main hold had arrived. The council delegation crested the final ridge, their faces set in judgment, only to have their certainty transformed by the sight below. The sky spire stood not as a folly, but as a fact, its peak alive with a captured star whose silver light washed over the mountain. Where they had expected to find a struggling camp, they saw thriving forges burning without smoke and new green growth spreading across stone that had been barren for centuries. The very air hummed with a clean, potent energy. Grimnir, who had come to deliver a verdict of failure, found himself speechless before a vision of success he could not refute. A murmur of awe rippled through his followers, and one by one, they broke from his side, moving toward the light, their loyalty shifting in that single, silent moment. Grimnir stood alone, his pride a fortress under siege. He refused to look at Borin, his gaze fixed stubbornly on the ground, the weight of his misjudgment a heavier burden than any stone. This was the final confrontation, not of axes, but of will. Borin could have claimed his victory. He could have shamed the elder before the entire assembled kingdom. Instead, he walked forward, his hands empty, and spoke not as a conqueror to a defeated rival, but as one leader to another. Your council was born of a desire to protect our people, Borin said, his voice carrying easily in the charged air. That desire is needed now more than ever. I offer you a place not in my shadow, but at my side, as chief advisor to this new age. The unity of every Dwarven clan, the very future Borin had sacrificed so much to build, now rested on one elder's capacity to let go of his pride and embrace a wonder he had fought against. For a long moment, Grimnir remained motionless, the silence stretching taut. Then, with a sigh that seemed to release the struggles of a lifetime, he took a single step forward. Then another. He walked past Borin, past the watching crowds, his steps carrying him toward the central forge, where the silver fire burned brightest. He stopped before it, the clean heat washing over his face, and as he stared into the heart of the flame, the stern lines of his expression finally softened into something new, something like wonder and something like peace. The silver fire of the central forge cast long, dancing shadows as Borin and Grimnir stood before the anvil. Between them lay the materials of a new beginning, a bar of the old kingdom's steel, dark and familiar, and a shimmering ingot of the new mithril, born from the reclaimed mountains. To forge a new crown from these separate metals was a challenge that demanded not just heat and hammer, but a shared will. The feeling in the air was not from the fire, but from the long history between the two dwarves, a lifetime of differing beliefs that now had to be joined in this single, symbolic act. Borin took up the heavy hammer first, his strikes rhythmic and strong, heating and folding the metals together. Then, without a word, he offered the hammer to Grimnir. It was a gesture that hushed the watching council into silence. The final shaping of the crown, the blows that would define its form, would be struck by the king's most vocal challenger. Grimnir's hand closed around the haft, his knuckles white. This was the moment of choice, to participate fully in this new vision, or to hold onto the memory of the old. He brought the hammer down, his strike precise and sure, folding the mithril's light into the steel's strength. They worked in a quiet tandem, a dialogue of metal and resolve, until the crown of unity rested on the anvil, a band of intertwined gray and silver, simple in its design, but profound in its meaning. Grimnir then did what none thought possible. He knelt, not in submission, but in fealty, and pledged his axe and his counsel to the United Kingdom. The division that had threatened to separate their people was sealed shut in that moment, as solid as the newly forged metal. This hard-won unity was their greatest strength, yet it was also a bond of shared responsibility. Borin was no longer a solitary visionary, but a king bound to the wisdom of his counsel, and Grimnir was no longer a protector of the past, but a guardian of a future he had helped to shape. As the crown was placed upon Borin's head, its weight was more than physical. It was the weight of every compromise yet to be made, every shared decision that would chart their course. The celebrations that followed echoed through the halls, but for the king, the true work was just beginning. The great hall hummed with a new kind of energy, the silver light from the spire illuminating faces of stone, crystal, and feather. High King Borin Stonehand stood before the first council of the Reborn kingdom, a gathering unlike any in their long history. Dwarven thanes, deep gnome elders, and the great eagle matriarch herself were seated as equals around a vast, circular table carved from a single slab of mountain heartstone. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, charged with the weight of the moment. They were not just rebuilding a city, they were forging a new way of being. The first order of business was the ratification of the treaties of mutual aid, documents that wove their separate fates into a single, strong cord. A dwarf pledged his axe to defend a gnome crystal grove. A gnome offered her people's skill in stabilizing a dwarven mine shaft, and the eagles promised their watchful eyes over the high passes for all. These were not mere words, they were the foundation stones of a shared future. Yet, laying those stones was a complex and often difficult process. The first true test came during the debate over law and custom. A dwarven law stated that any dispute over mineral rights was to be settled by a test of stonecraft. A gnome tradition held that such matters were best resolved through mediation and shared dream walking. The two systems were as different as granite and gossamer. Voices were raised, not in anger, but in deep-seated cultural confusion. How could one set of laws honor two such different ways of seeing the world? The tension in the hall was a delicate thing, a fragile crystal that could easily be shattered by a single wrong word. Borin listened to every perspective, his gaze moving from the passionate Dwarven mine chief to the softly spoken Gnome elder. He saw that to impose one culture's way upon another would be to create a resentment that would poison their alliance for generations. His decision, when it came, established a new principle of governance. The council's decisions would be made by majority vote, he decreed, but any law that touched directly upon the sacred customs of a people could only pass with the consent of their representatives. It was a system built on mutual respect, a promise that no voice would be silenced simply because it was in the minority. The success of this first council was about more than the treaties they signed. It was about setting a living precedent, a model of cooperation that their children and their children's children would follow. A single failure here could embed a flaw in the very heart of their new society, a crack that would widen with every passing year into a chasm of distrust. The stakes for that single gathering would echo for 1,000 years. As the final accord was sealed, the atmosphere in the hall shifted from one of tense negotiation to one of shared purpose. The Eagle matriarch, who had observed the proceedings with her ancient, knowing eyes, let out a soft, approving call. The first joint project of the United Peoples was decided, a symbol of their practical commitment to one another. They would build a great road, a wide, smooth highway of fitted stone that would connect the deepest Gnome crystalline city to the highest Dwarven hold, with way stations accessible to the Eagles. It would be called the Path of Shared Breath, a tangible artery for trade, for aid, and for the simple, vital act of visiting a neighbor. The Road of Unity began as a line on a master map, a thread of intention meant to bind three peoples together. Kayla unrolled the great vellum scroll across the charting table, her finger tracing a proposed path through impossible geography. Her appointment as chief cartographer was a natural choice, but the responsibility was immense. Her lines would not just direct stone and labor, they would navigate generations of history, symbolic ground, and the delicate trust of a new alliance. The first challenge was not the mountains themselves, but the spaces they held sacred. The proposed route needed to cross a Dwarven ancestral memorial site, a place of quiet remembrance where the stone was considered hallowed. It also needed to pass near a Gnome crystalline grove, where the living rock sang with a unique and fragile resonance. To the Eagles, the air above a particular peak was a sacred current, a pathway for their fledglings' first flights. The road could not simply go around all of them. It had to find a way through that honored each tradition without compromising the whole. Kayla spent days in deep discussion, not in council chambers, but in the places themselves. She walked the silent memorial site with the Dwarven elders, listening to the stories of the names carved into the stone. She sat in the crystalline grove with the gnomes, feeling the subtle hum in the air. She climbed to the high peak with the Eagle matriarch, understanding the importance of the wind's specific path. Her solution was a testament to her diplomacy. The road would not go over the memorial site, but through a newly excavated tunnel beneath it, a passage that would not disturb the honored ground. As it approached the crystalline grove, it would be routed behind a natural rock face, its noise and vibration shielded by the living mountain. And the sacred air current would be bridged by a low, wide archway that respected the eagle's flight path. This careful, respectful routing was a triumph of empathy over simple efficiency. The physical construction that followed was a symphony of coordinated effort. Dwarven crews, with their immense strength and knowledge of stone, laid the wide, perfectly fitted flagstones that formed the road foundation. Gnome artisans followed, inlaying the expansion joints with flexible crystal fibers that glowed with a soft light at dusk, making the path safe for night travel. The eagles acted as aerial surveyors, spotting the most stable routes across treacherous scree slopes and guiding the builders away from hidden fissures. The road became a living symbol of their pact, each people contributing their unique strength to the whole. As the first major segment was completed, a new, quiet energy began to flow along its smooth surface. A gnome crystal singer could now walk safely to a dwarven forge to collaborate on a new lens. A dwarf could bring a load of fresh forged tools to trade for rare gnome herbs. The movement was small at first, a trickle of curiosity and commerce. Then came the day a lookout spotted a small group of travelers approaching from the southern pass. They were not dwarves, nor gnomes, nor any known mountain people. They moved with the weary but determined gait of those on a long journey, their clothes fashioned from materials unknown to the mountain folk. They had followed the new road, drawn by the stories of a silver light on the peak and the rumors of a kingdom reborn from legend. The strangers stood at the great gate, their clothes woven from foreign cloth, and their eyes alight with a curiosity that had not been seen in the mountain passes for 1,000 years. They were envoys from the sunlit human kingdoms and the ancient elven woods, drawn across the continents by the persistent silver star burning atop the peak. Their arrival brought the Dwarven kingdom from its hard-won isolation directly into the view of the wider world, a place of both glittering opportunity and hidden perils. The great hall, once filled only with the familiar sounds of Dwarven and Gnomish speech, now echoed with the melodic tones of Elvish and the direct cadence of the common tongue. For some, like the veteran Deactivating, this was an unwelcome intrusion. He watched from the shadows, his arms crossed, seeing not potential allies, but the ghosts of old betrayals. He voiced the worry shared by many, that these outsiders, with their smooth words and endless needs, would slowly wear away their traditions, turning their independence into a dependency. The council was divided once more, not by internal strife, but by the challenge of the outside. Borin listened to the concerns, his own heart a mix of caution and a king's foresight. To shut the gates now would be to build their own prison of stone, to live in fear of the very world they had just rejoined. His decision was a careful one, a path between suspicion and naivete. He would welcome the envoys openly, granting them embassies within the outer halls, but he would also establish clear and fair trade agreements from the very start, ensuring his people were never taken advantage of. The stakes of these first interactions were immense, for the reputation they forged now would be told in songs and histories for 1,000 years, painting them either as wise and honorable lords of the mountain, or as reclusive and untrustworthy hoarders of wealth. Amid the formal greetings and the exchange of gifts, one figure stood apart from the diplomatic entourage. A human scholar, his robes dusty from the road, approached Kayla not with offers of trade, but with a question. He unrolled a set of ancient maps across her charting table, their inks faded but their lines precise. He pointed to a series of markings deep within the Silver Mountains, symbols that corresponded with no known Dwarven settlement or Gnomish city. These charts, he explained in a hushed tone, suggested the range held secrets far older than any Dwarven kingdom, traces from a time before the mountains had names. The silver light from the spire washed over the kingdom below, illuminating a tapestry of shared effort. From his vantage point, High King Borin Stonehand watched the steady flow of dwarves, gnomes, and eagles along the path of shared breath, their movements a living testament to a bond forged in trust and shared experience. The spire was a marvel, yes, a needle of stone stitching the earth to the stars, but as he felt its deep hum resonate through the stone beneath his feet, he understood its true purpose was not to be a monument to Dwarven glory alone. It was a beacon, and a beacon's light is meant for all who travel in the dark. The greatest challenge of his reign was not the construction, but the choice of what to do with its completion. To hoard this power, to build walls around this wonder, would be to repeat the very mistakes of isolation that had once brought his people to a difficult chapter in their history. The true culmination of their rebirth was not the spire itself, but the fragile, precious unity it represented. His decision crystallized with a clarity that felt as inevitable as the mountain's own pulse. He would not merely permit visitors or tolerate trade. He would share the spire's power and the knowledge of its creation freely, openly, with any peaceful race willing to learn and contribute to a new age of shared prosperity. This was the final, defining act of his kingship, a choice that would ensure the Dwarven kingdoms were remembered not as secretive hoarders of treasure, but as the architects of a brighter dawn for the entire world. He descended from the peak, the weight of the crown of unity, a comfortable presence on his brow, and summoned the council of all peoples. In the great hall, under the gentle silver light, he laid out his vision. The knowledge of the spire's construction, from the gnome crystal harmonics to the Dwarven stonework, would be recorded in a great library, accessible to all. The energy it provided would be available to any who pledged to use it for creation, not conquest. It was a gamble of unimaginable scale, offering the very heart of their strength to a world they were only just beginning to know. Yet in that risk lay their ultimate security, for a kingdom woven into the fate of the world is a kingdom that cannot be easily forgotten or assailed. The light of the sky spire would not shine solely on Dwarven stone, but would spill out across the lands, encouraging growth, mending old divisions, and inviting every peaceful heart to help build a future greater than any one kingdom could achieve alone. The Silver Mountains now breathe with a quiet, vibrant hum, a sound of forges and song echoing through halls that had known only silence for centuries. High King Borin Stonehand walks these passages not as a distant ruler, but as a steward, his authority tempered by the wisdom of a council that includes the deep voices of gnome elders and the sharp cries of eagles. He has learned that the strongest throne is built not on command, but on consensus, his compassion forged in the same fires that renewed his people's spirit. In the great library, its walls lined with scrolls of crystal and vellum. Kayla presides as the chief lore master. Her life's work is no longer just to uncover the past, but to weave its threads into the future, ensuring that every lesson from the Great Collapse and every triumph of the Rebirth is remembered, not as a dusty relic, but as a living guide. At the gates, Deactivating stands watch, his command now extending over a united guard of dwarf, gnome, and even a few eagle-eyed sentinels who patrol the high winds. The suspicion that once hardened his gaze has been replaced by a seasoned trust, earned in the deep dark and proven on the high peaks. This alliance is no longer a fragile pact, but the very bedrock of their society, growing stronger with each shared harvest and every jointly defended border. The Dwarven kingdoms have been reborn, yet they are no longer just Dwarven. They have become the heart of a thriving, interconnected world, a crossroads of culture and commerce, where the ring of a hammer is answered by the song of a crystal and the call of the sky. Their tales are already being sung in the surface lands, not as myths of a lost people, but as legends in the making, and their future, once bounded by the walls of a crumbling fortress, now stretches as far as the light from their spire can reach, a promise written not in stone, but in the limitless stars above.